What is a behemoth or Behemoth? Welcome back to the Alef calendar research project. To track the passage of time, it was necessary to memorize apparent shapes and various movements observed in the heavens. As previously mentioned, this research comes with its challenges, yet each piece gradually comes together, unveiling a hidden narrative about the passage of time itself. By identifying these apparent shapes through the lens of Noah's calendar and Job's creatures, you will begin to uncover clues to a captivating and unforgettable calendar system. The last two creatures mentioned in Job present features that are difficult to match with any known animals, both living or found in the fossil record. Those who translate the scriptures into English have acknowledged this difficulty, as most translators had no exact word for these creatures, choosing instead to transliterate the Hebrew into English. Let us read about the Behemoth. Look now at the Behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now, his strength is in his hips or loins, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs are like bars of iron. He is the first in the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus trees, in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade, and the willows by the brooks surround him. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He is confident, though the Jordan gushes into his mouth. Though he takes it in with his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a snare. In this video, we will analyze the poetic parallelism, vivid metaphors, and similes to help us understand the creature being described. For many years, I've enjoyed meeting up with others to read and discuss these ancient narratives, whether in cozy homes or in open outdoor spaces. Reading and rereading the passages over time has created lasting memories of conversations about Job's Behemoth, where we encountered both difficulties and solutions. One person suggested that the Behemoth might be a hippopotamus, able to stand in the Jordan River and to eat grass. Someone then asks if there is any evidence of hippos in the Jordan Valley. And another points out that a hippo has a tiny tail, not one like a cedar. Someone else might suggest that the hippo's short, hairy tail could be seen as a miniature, upside-down version of a cedar. Honestly, I find it challenging to discern whether the author of Job is referring to a large trunk of a tree or just a small branch. Next, someone will use the context to explain why it's unlikely to be an elephant or crocodile. Then another person might suggest it could have been a dinosaur. Now, being a word nerd, I find it fitting to consult the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon. The lexicon groups Behemoth with two other similar terms. Bet, hey, mem. Shut, impede in speech, tongue-tied, to be dumb. Behemoth, noun, feminine, beast, animal, cattle. Especially therefore cattle, as owned and used by man. Rarely of wild beasts, especially carnivora. Behemoth, noun, masculine. Hippopotamus appears to be plural intensive of the foregoing term, that is, behemoth or cattle, from an assumed Egyptian behemo, ox of the water. The Brown Driver Briggs lexicon suggests that behemoth could refer to a hippopotamus and connects the term to a family of words related to beasts or cattle. The lexicon notes that behemoth appears to be the plural intensive form of the word for cattle, behemoth, while behemoth is feminine. Behemoth is masculine plural intensive. Those familiar with Hebrew will recognize that plural intensive does not indicate multiple cattle, but rather a single, more majestic or exceptional animal. In the context of Job, Behemoth is described as a single male animal, with the word his used, rather than words like her or their. See now, his strength is in his hips and loins, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar, and the sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, and his ribs are like bars of iron. Hence, behemoth, the ending ot, is not feminine plural, but rather masculine plural intensive, speaking of a singular beast. The Brown Driver Briggs headword is related to Arabic and Ethiopian words for mute or dumb. Strong's Concordance also relates behemoth to being mute. I was curious whether a hippopotamus is mute, and I discovered that it is actually quite a noisy creature. Similarly, we know that behemoth, referring to cattle and livestock, are not completely mute, as they too make various sounds. Then I realized that I had been influenced by my own bias as a computer technician. I was applying the technological definition of mute, which disables the sound from speakers, to a living creature. It took me a while to recognize that, when referring to living creatures, mute means they can make sounds, but they cannot speak. Gesenius lexicon also groups these three words together, similar to the Brown Driver Briggs, and suggests that Behemoth refers to a hippopotamus. I will post the relevant Gesenius and Brown Driver Briggs articles on the GitHub page. Jeff Bemmer's lexicon, however, chooses a different root word, Beth Mem, which is not found in the other lexicons. In his interpretation, the hay is removed, connecting the concept of cattle to a tall creature. In various scriptures, Behemoth or cattle is used as one of several broad categories to describe living creatures. For example, then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, or Behemoth, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Now that we have touched on the definitions and context, let's see if we can identify a hippopotamus-like creature in the night sky. As with all the other creatures in the Job narrative, we should be able to find multiple details that match. Look now at the Behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. The narrative compares the Behemoth with the bakar, or ox, as both being herbivores. The bakar ox is a domestic ox, whereas earlier in Job 39 we looked at a wild ox called the rein. We found the apparent shape of the wild ox here. Now, just to the left of the wild ox, we find a shape that resembles the head of a hippopotamus. This narrative in Job appears to draw our attention back to the sixth day of creation, as it reads, "Which I made along with you, and he is the first of the ways of God, he who made him." The Genesis narrative explains that on the sixth day, God created both cattle, Behemoth, and man, Adam. As we saw in the lexicons, cattle, or Behemoth, is grouped with Behemoth, the creature of Job. Similarly, the author of Job alludes back to the sixth day of creation, when Behemoth and Adam were created together. As an aside, the first chapter of Genesis contains hidden poetic parallels in the first 6 days. The first 3 days lay the foundation, and the latter 3 days fill in details. Returning to Job, the following verses give us a detailed mental image of this ancient behemoth. See now, his strength is in his hips or loins, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, and his ribs like bars of iron. Before we explore the various possible matches, it is important to note that this is an attempt to decode an ancient puzzle, which comes with its own inherent complexities. It seems that these last two beasts are drawing our attention to the apparent shapes of creatures much larger than those in the previous list. Here is a possible match for Behemoth. The author poetically highlights the strength and power of Behemoth, focusing on his hips and stomach muscles. While the top of this region appears smooth, these rougher areas represent his muscular strength. Now, hippos are mostly muscle, with very little body fat. When they cool off in rivers, they don't float. Instead, their dense muscles cause them to sink, allowing them to walk along the riverbed. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. As previously mentioned, this verse evokes different images in the minds of different individuals. When considering this particular nebula shape, I found it did not fully resolve the discrepancies, as more than one match seems possible. For those who interpret the tail, like a cedar, as resembling a small upside-down cedar tree, this region appears to be a match. Meanwhile, others may envision the tail, like a cedar, as similar to a trunk of a cedar, as a dinosaur-like tail, just as Strong's lexicon suggests. Perhaps an extinct dinosaur or terrible lizard, a diplodocus or brachiosaurus. Exact meaning unknown. The description of a tail like a cedar and the tightly knit sinews of his thighs might refer to the variegated, dark dust clouds that obscure light, creating shapes resembling bark furrows and sinews. This next phrase is indeed a curious one. He moves his tail like a cedar. It seems strange because the trunk of a cedar, whether rooted in the ground or uprooted to be used as a support beam, is typically stationary and does not move. I found passages that mention cedars growing, being cut down, plucked up, transported, or burned, but very few that refer to cedars in motion or moving. In searching for natural movements of cedars, their branches sway in the wind and release pollen showers into the air. Yet, moving branches and pollen still didn't seem like a fitting match for a hippopotamus tail. However, one exception to this lack of movement appears in a cleansing ritual that involves birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop. In Leviticus 14, movements of this cedar may closer match those of an animal's tail. It reads, "As for the living bird, he shall take it, the cedar wood, and the scarlet, and the hyssop, and dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water. And he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed from the leprosy, and shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird loose in an open field." Here, a moving cedar can be inferred as part of the sprinkling implement used in this cleansing ceremony for both people and houses. As both the Brown Driver Briggs and Gesenius lexicons suggest that Behemoth refers to a hippopotamus, I unfortunately decided to investigate the movements of a hippo's tail. It turns out that the hippo rarely moves its short, stubby tail, unless it deems it necessary to mark his territory. The hippo uses its tail to unleash a disturbing dung shower, ensuring his domain is well marked. Returning to the theme of determining whether the author is describing apparent shapes in the Milky Way, matching the behemoth to a hippopotamus would imply that the tail corresponds more closely to these regions here. His bones are like beams of bronze, and his ribs like bars of iron. These 2 lines now seem to describe the attributes of a hippopotamus skeleton. Like most animals, the bones are usually covered by a smooth layer of skin, suggesting that the author might have examined the skeletal remains of a dead hippo. This animal encyclopedia reads, "The hippo's bulbous body is supported by oddly slender legs, but these legs have osteosclerotic bones, meaning they are extremely dense, with little of the porous material that is present in most mammalian leg bones. This skeletal adaptation allows the enormous hippo to sink to the bottom of the river and walk on the riverbed floor." The author likens the bones and ribs of the behemoth to bronze and iron. When we examine the apparent shapes of the nebulae, we find that the upper regions of this apparent behemoth appear smooth, similar to the skin of a hippo. In contrast, the lower region resembles bones and ribs, with colors like unto bronze and iron. He is the first in the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. We have previously looked at the battle horse, of which we found in the rider's hand the apparent shape of a large sword. However, this could incorrectly suggest that the apparent shape of the rider is he who made him, that is, the rider made Behemoth. This interpretation is problematic on several levels. It implies that one region of the Milky Way created another larger region. Also, this conflicts with studying God himself, in that interpreting a rider shape as its creator is not in harmony with the context that the rest of scriptures present. This example illustrates how this calendar research project can be fraught with issues that may lead to incorrect conclusions. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. These mountains where the beasts of the field play likely refer to the diverse range of creature shapes that we have been observing throughout this study. He lies under the lotus trees in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade, and the willows by the brook surround him. The narrative poetically repeats similar sentiments about the behemoth being under, covered, and surrounded by plant material. This plant material is listed twice as lotus trees, as well as reeds and willows. Starting from the bottom up, the covert of reeds and marsh may be represented by these slender, dark, dust cloud nebulae that appear to emerge from the dark marsh below. The willows which surround him may be depicted here and here. in the front and back. The lotus trees are mentioned twice as a place for the behemoth to lie under and to be shaded. Before attempting to locate the lotus tree, let us examine the lexicon definition. The Hebrew word is zalim, which the lexicon defines as a kind of lotus, rhamnus, more exactly the Sisyphus. The Sisyphus lotus is native to the Mediterranean region. It has yellow flowers and has red or reddish-brown fruit. Now, if we look above the apparent behemoth shape, we can see colors that resemble the flowers and fruit of the Sisyphus lotus. The appearance of shade or shadow may describe the upper region of the behemoth as appearing to be in shade. This shade could also be represented by this dark band, although I prefer the former interpretation. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He is confident, though the Jordan gushes into his mouth. This part of the narrative draws our attention to a raging river and the Jordan. The muscle and bone density of a hippopotamus gives it the ability to confidently stand in rivers. The river may be referring to this large, dark nebula that descends off to the left. The river is said to gush into his mouth. The mouth of a hippo contains unique teeth. This white nebula here may be interpreted as both the raging water and the hippo's teeth. The last verse reads, "Though he takes it in with his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a snare." Young's literal translation makes more sense, as it asks two questions, in the sense of attempting to take or pierce this beast. It reads, "Before his eyes doth one take him, with snares doth one pierce his nose?" The eyes of the behemoth could be matched with these two beady white stars. The snare may be represented by either this smaller box-shaped area in front of him or this white nebulae. The imagery of the behemoth in the narrative of Job evokes a deep sense of curiosity about what exactly the author is describing, as presented through these translations and these lexicon definitions. By carefully examining the poetic descriptions and underlying hints of possible celestial representations, we gain a greater appreciation for the depth of these ancient narratives. In the next video, we will examine another creature that the translators have left untranslated, the Leviathan, which in Hebrew is Leviathan.